Today I'm going to tell you about how I nearly took down a multi-billion-dollar company, how I learned to ice skate in a suit, and why I turned down the highest paying job offer I've ever received. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name's Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream projects sooner. Now, everything I talked about in this intro may sound completely unrelated, but every single one of them happened because of one internship I had in college. And there's tons of other stories in that internship I'd love to talk about, but in this video, I'm really going to focus on those three core stories. To get started though, I need to talk about how I actually got this internship. So my sophomore year of school, towards the very beginning, I went to the fall career fair, hoping to try to find an internship that I could apply to. And there was one company in particular that I know was really keen on hiring new college students, freshmen, sophomore, junior year students that didn't have very much experience. So I went to them, I talked with them, they were interested in, I applied, ended up getting an interview, and I went to the interview. But before I could go to the interview, I actually had to go and buy a suit. And that's because at this company, every single employee was required to wear a suit and tie. And not only just that, they had to wear a white shirt and they had to have a black or a blue suit. It was very, very strict dress code at that company. So of course I needed to go get a suit because I didn't own any at that point. I went, got a suit, and luckily was able to get it in time for my interview. I went to the interview and luckily it went well enough that I ended up getting a job. So a few weeks later, I went to my first day of work and I walked in and I realized that this building was quite massive. Inside this building, there was probably about 400-ish desks, all in one giant rectangular shaped room with no walls, no cubicles, no pillars, nothing. It was just this giant empty room with 400 desks in it, which normally wouldn't be that big of a deal, except about 95% of the people that sat at these desks were sales reps, which meant they were constantly taking and answering phone calls all day long and talking with people. So I was surrounded by hundreds of different sales reps, all trying to sell things and do different sales conversations on the phone all day long while I'm trying to concentrate on programming. And let me just tell you, that is a nightmarish situation to be in. Not only am I in a full suit and tie, which is just terribly uncomfortable, but I'm also surrounded by tons of people talking on the phone, all to different people, so I just have huge amounts of distractions all the time. Now, luckily, I was able to look over this because they paid quite well and they also had a really good training program for interns. And the reason they actually had such a good training program for interns was because this company hired a lot of interns. I would say at all times, about a third or more of their engineering staff was all interns, which is a good thing if you're an intern, but a bad thing otherwise. And that's because, the code quality wasn't as good as it could be. And it just had a lot of turnover because interns don't usually stick around that long. So it really wasn't the best long-term situation, but as an intern, it was great. And the training program they had was quite good. You get paired up with one of the senior developers on the team. You go through this set project and the senior developer is there to help you and mentor you through the whole thing. And this was great for me because I had zero web development experience before starting this job, and this job was entirely web development with VB.net and some JavaScript thrown in there. So I was going through this training program, I was learning jQuery, I was learning JavaScript, CSS, HTML, all that stuff, and I was constantly taking my progress and showing it to the senior developer, but this was a bit of a problem because the senior developer was always so busy that it took him tons of time to be able to look through my changes and get me approved, which meant I was going through this training program incredibly slowly. I was actually going through so slowly that I would just constantly have days or even weeks of work where I had nothing to do because I was just waiting for the senior developer to get back to me and approve this. And no matter how much I bugged him, he just never got back because he was so busy. And this actually caused my manager to come over to me multiple times and ask why I was taking so long getting through this program and why I was so much slower than everyone else that was going through it. And it was mostly entirely because I was just waiting for that senior developer to get back to me. But even though it took a long time for me to get through the training progress, I quite enjoyed it and I learned a ton of stuff about JavaScript, jQuery, CSS, and so on. It was my first real experience of web development. And one kind of embarrassing thing I do want to mention though, is that since I learned jQuery and JavaScript at the exact same time, they were used in that company at the same time, I actually didn't know there was a difference between the two. I thought jQuery and JavaScript were the same thing, and it was probably at least like 3 to 4 years after that internship before I really truly understood the core differences between JavaScript and jQuery and could use them without one another. Now let's fast forward a couple months to where I'm working on real projects, and the main project I'm working on is a task management system. Everyone inside this company uses this task management system to manage all of the different tasks they do. Everyone from the CEO all the way down to the people that are working the printing press are using this task management system, so it's vital to every single working part of this company. And I, as a lowly intern with about 2 months of web development experience, was working on and pushing code to this project. But not only that, the worst part was there was no version control at all in this company. The way that you made changes were that you would go in, you would make changes locally, test them, made sure that they worked, and then you would compile the code. When it was compiled, you would take the files, you would copy them, paste them onto the server that they had running in-house. They had their own servers. So you just copy, paste it over to the server, and there you go. It's now deployed. Luckily, they had a staging server, so I could copy the changes to the staging server, check to make sure it worked in the staging environment, and then I could copy those same files, paste them into the production server, and there you go, I could check it in production. And I, as a lowly intern with 2 months of experience, had access to copy and paste whatever I wanted to the production server. I could delete the entire production server, I could copy all the files over that I wanted, I had access to the production database, I could do whatever I wanted as a lowly 2-month intern. Now already this should be raising tons of red flags. A billion-dollar company shouldn't be working on copy and pasting code from a local computer onto a production server, especially someone with as little experience as me as an intern should not have access to that. And because of this issue, I nearly took down the entire company. So let's fast forward a little bit more. I'm working on this project and I'm trying to build up some features and I'm working on them locally and they all seem to be working fine. And I want to go test them on staging. So I go over to the staging environment, I compile my code, I copy and I paste it into the staging environment. And at this point, I'm testing things that are only broken on staging, but not in my local environment. So I have a bunch of debug statements thrown in there. I have some kind of non-working code. Really, it's not a final released version of this product. I just want to see what it looks like on staging to see if I can catch these weird edge cases. So I put it up on staging, I refresh, nothing happens. I refresh again, nothing happens. And I'm like, why the heck is my code not showing up? I go back to my code, make some more jarring changes. And I say, okay, make these things really obvious to me. Copy that, paste it over to the staging environment. Again, the changes are not showing up. And then I realize after a little while that I had been copying over to the production environment. And that's because the only difference between the production environment and the staging environment is one folder. I just selected one folder different, so I selected the production folder instead of the staging folder, and that was my mistake. I didn't realize it because they look identical, and I copied over all the files to production. This meant that all of the janky development code with all the weird console log and debug statements all over the place was now pushed up to the production environment, and it had been that way for probably an hour. This is not good. I mean, the entire company runs on this system. So of course I am panicking because I'm like, oh crap, I need to find the backup of these files. I need to get the working version on here. So I had to revert all my changes because of course we're just overwriting the changes. You copy paste the files, it overwrites everything. There's no version control. I can't revert back. So I'm having to take all my local code and try to revert back to what's on the production environment. And that's taking time, of course. And I'm like frantically trying to copy that as quickly as I can over to the production environment. Luckily, I'm able to get everything resolved and pushed over there before anyone really started to notice too much. Maybe they did notice, but I never heard about it because I was able to do it all on my own. Now, this is not something I would recommend. I would highly recommend if you get in this situation, go to the senior developer and be like, oh crap, I messed up, help me out with this, because they could have probably resolved it way quicker than I did, and I probably caused more harm than good by trying to do it on my own. But in the end, I was able to resolve the issue on my own. But from that day forward, I can assure you, I always double checked what folder I was in before I made any changes, double, triple, quadruple checked it, because I was always so nervous of doing that again. Now, while all this is happening, I'm working at this company for a couple years. I'm living at the dorms in my school and I'm going to school and all of that. And in order to get to work, I would walk to my car, which was in a parking garage about a half-mile away from where I lived and slept. So that meant I had about a half-mile walk every single day to get to my car and then to get back to my dorm, which normally is not that big of a deal. But when you have to wear a full suit and tie every single day, it can become quite problematic, especially in the summer. In the summer, the temperatures got to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and when you're wearing a full suit and tie outside in 100 degrees in the sun, it really wears on you, and I was always sweating before I even got to my car to go to work. But the summers weren't the worst, it was actually the winters that were the worst, and that's because on the way to my car, there's a section that I need to walk through, which is quite sloped. It has a very sharp decline slope, and it's all concrete. There's no way to get around this section, and that's because it's essentially a slope that leads to a parking lot for people from the road, and it's a very sharp incline. And when you're wearing dress shoes that have absolutely zero traction, in the winter, when this gets covered in ice, it is literally just a sheet of ice. And it didn't matter how I walked or what I did, the slope was always so steep that as soon as I stepped on it, I always slid straight down to the bottom. There was no way that I could walk it, I just had to slide to the bottom if there was ice there. So by the end of my 3-ish years that I worked there, I became very good at being able to balance and slide on dress shoes down ice while wearing a full suit. Let me tell you, the first few times I did this, I fell a lot, but I got so good at the end I could just kind of do it without even thinking about it. So really, I'm pretty much a professional suit ice skater. I don't really think there's anyone else out there that tries this, so I want to say I'm the best in the world. Now, another interesting weather-related fact about this job is that eventually they built a new building where all of the programmers and developers were going to go, which meant I no longer had to be in the same building as all the sales reps, which was great. But one issue was the section of the building I was in had very bad climate control, and that meant that in the winter it was always very cold and in the summer it was always very hot. We were never 100% sure why, but our assumption was always that there was some type of connection to the outside that was letting in outside air in through the ventilation system into this section where we sat, which meant in the winter, the temperatures got down to about 50-ish degrees in the office, which is quite cold when you aren't wearing gloves or anything. And in the summer, the temperatures, would be over 80 degrees, which when you're in a full suit is miserable to work in. So I remember all the time when I was working there, I would always constantly be getting up in the winter. I would go over to the bathroom, I would just turn the hot water on and stick my hands under there to warm up my hands because they would get so cold typing on the computer. And in the summer, I would do the exact same thing. I would go into the bathroom, I would just take off my jacket and just let the fresh, cool air hit me because in the bathroom, they had perfect climate control, but in the area where I sat, it was always either miserably hot or miserably cold. And it was actually that way all the way up until the day I left, and it's probably still that way to this day. Now, I finally want to tell you about how I turned down the largest job offer I've ever received, and that was from this company when I was getting ready to graduate and go from an intern to full-time. They ended up giving me a full-time job offer, and they said they would pay me $75,000 a year, and I pretty much instantly turned it down, and then from there they tried to increase the salary even higher to try to entice me to stay there. And where I actually lived at, this was a really good offer. The next highest offer I got was maybe like 60-something thousand, so it was like $20,000 higher after the different increases they were giving me, which is a very significant increase. But the main reason I turned this down was because it's really important to have a good work-life balance, and it's important to work at a company you really care about and that cares about you. And the one thing I knew about that company from working there as an intern for about 3 years is they did not care about their employees. They gave you 5 days of vacation a year, moving up to 10 after so many years of working there, so that was already pretty low. They had terrible insurance for health and dental and all of that, and overall, they just did not care about their employees at all. They made you all wear suits, which is just uncomfortable. They just had a very corporate experience, and like I said, they did not care about their employees. While some of the other companies I applied to, they really took their employees seriously. I ended up taking the job offer that paid me the least amount of money out of any job offer I had, all because they gave me the impression that they actually cared about their employees, and that to me is way more important than anything else. It's also important to have good work-life balance, so having good vacation and good experience where you're happy at work and you're happy when you're not at work, that's what's most important to me, and that is something that that job could never give me. So if you have a high-paying job offer, make sure you consider all of those other factors to make sure it's really something that you want. Now, if you enjoyed this video, you're going to love this video, which is how I cost myself $40,000 because of one interview mistake. It's a super fun video to watch, and hopefully you can learn from it and not make the same mistake I did. With that said, thank you very much for watching and have a good day.